Samsung began the year 2020 with the launch of two, perhaps unexpected phones, the Galaxy S10 Lite and the Note 10 Lite. The S10 in 2020 sounds really surprising since it came out almost the moment when the S20 series has been launched. So, what is all this about? It could be that the Samsung has decided to implement the surplus of Snapdragon 855, the best chipset from 2019, into its new S10 Lite model. It is a bit of a paradox, but this is the first Samsung phone with the Snapdragon 855 chipset in Europe. You all know about Samsung's long-standing decision that only a few markets in the world get Snapdragon versions of their phones, while everyone else, including Europe, gets Samsung's own Exynos chipset. Which again, many don't like. Not because it's bad, but because it's objectively weaker than the Snapdragon and less power efficient. Samsung really managed to confuse people with the introduction of the S10 Lite. More so since the phone is not light by any of its characteristics. The S10 Lite is an S10 with plenty of enhancements, though there are still some differences in favor of the older model. The Lite version of this S10 received a significant larger battery, 4500 mAh versus the 3400 mAh, 45 watt charging versus the 15 watt, as well as the massive 6.7 inch display versus the 6.1 inch on the S10 and 6.4 inches on S10 Plus. So we have a paradox that the Lite model is bigger than the Plus model. Also, S10 Lite has a Super AMOLED Plus screen instead of a dynamic Super AMOLED in the full-blooded S10 line. As for the differences, Lite has a plastic back but also the main 48 megapixel sensor that is making its premiere on the Snapdragon 855 chipset, as it was previously reserved only for premium models. Did we mention that the S10 Lite's price is $560? This is more than we are used to seeing on smartphones with Lite in their names, but let's see what the S10 Lite has to offer for that amount. Design-wise, it looks more like it came from the same production line as the S20 models. The massive rectangular chassis shares the look of the S20 family, while the front is reminiscent of the Note 10, A51, A71 phones with Infinity O screen, since it has the same centrally positioned selfie camera first seen on the Note 10 series, the design which was later adopted by the new generation of Galaxy A and S20 series. So we have a huge screen with thin bezels and a selfie camera and the only element at the front. The edges are slightly slanted, and just above the camera there is a discrete opening for the handset speaker. As we mentioned, the screen is not dynamic Super AMOLED, which is the best that Samsung has to offer, but is labeled as Super AMOLED Plus. Although Samsung does not offer details on the differences between the two, it is assumed that one of them is HDR10 Plus certification versus the HDR10 for S10 and Note 10 models, hence probably the Plus in the screen name. The larger 6.7-inch screen has a popular 20:9 aspect ratio and 2400 x 1080 pixel resolution. As with all Super AMOLED displays, color rendering is at highest level, as is the dynamic contrast that works particularly well in the bright sunlight when high brightness allows for extremely good visibility. What surprised us was the default setting, which is not vivid with boosted colors but natural with very true colors that we would expect on a Super AMOLED screen. The phone's frame is made of metal and it's perfectly fitted with the screen and plastic back. When we say plastic back, it's actually what Samsung calls Glastic, which is a glass-looking plastic material found on Samsung's newer generation non-flagship phones. The power button and the volume rocker are located on the right side, in the usual positions, and lie fairly snug in their slots without any unwanted movement. On the left side there is a slot for 2 nano SIM cards or a nano SIM plus micro SD card, while the only thing found at the top of the device is the second microphone. On the bottom there is a USB-C port, the mono speaker grill, and the microphone slot just next to it. The microphone position surprised us a bit as it's right next to the speaker, which does not seem to be a good solution in case you use the speakerphone, especially since there is plenty of space on the other side of the phone. As you've probably noticed, the trend of eliminating the 3.5mm audio connector continues, and the handset that also comes in the package is USB-C. This also means that all those 3.5mm headphones you've been buying for years are simply not usable, unless you buy a Samsung 3.5mm USB-C adapter, which, surely enough, does not come in the package. We emphasize the Samsung adapter because any other adapters will not work. We checked with one Huawei and 2 third-party adapters, which work fine with all manufacturers other than Samsung. Needless to say, the quality of the USB-C AKG headphones which comes with the phone can be described as mediocre at best. Since the fingerprint sensor is located under the screen, the back has no other elements except the Samsung logo at the bottom and the camera body. The cameras are placed 3 in a row, one below the other, while next to the first one there is an LED flash, and next to the middle one, surrounded by the silver pattern, the inscription Super Steady OIS. Since for our test we received the black model, or as Samsung puts it, Prism Black, the problem of dust and dirt collecting along the edge of the camera housing was more noticeable. Most of us have a habit of cleaning the fingerprints from the back of the device, and believe me, you will be doing this often by rubbing your phone against a t-shirt or a sweatshirt. As a result, since the camera body is not flat with the rest of the phone, the space located a few millimeters along the edge of the camera needs special attention, or it will otherwise collect dirt quite easily. Considering the dimensions of the camera body, as with S20 series, its width allows the phone to stand firmly on the flat surface. But it will be the first element to make contact with the surface when you put your phone down, so it might not be a bad idea to get a cover that can level the camera and the back. When it comes to ergonomics, all phones with a screen size exceeding 5.8 inches are a challenge for one-hand use. With a 6.7-inch screen, even with the elongated 20:9 format, you'll not be able to reach the notification bar with one hand. Given the dimensions and the massive battery, S10 Lite actually looks very thin, with a well-balanced weight of the elements inside the phone. Since we mentioned the battery, we should note that it is easily able to get you 2 days of use or about 15 hours of continuous video playback, which is a very good result. Our 10-hour YouTube test ended with 37% of the battery remaining. One of the coolest surprises with the phone is the 45-watt fast charging via USB Power Delivery 3.0 technology, which means that you can get from 0 to 100 charge in about an hour, or half an hour if you'll be charged in 60%. The bad thing is that Samsung ships the phone with a 25-watt charger, so for fast charging you will need to buy a 45-watt charger, which is available on Samsung's website, with a price tag of 50 euros or roughly $60. On the hardware side, the S10 Lite has something that no Lite models in the world had before: the strongest chipset that fueled the S10 and Note 10 series phones in the US and Chinese markets, the 7nm Snapdragon 855. The only Samsung phone to offer stronger hardware is the newly launched S20 series, which has a Snapdragon 865 with higher clock rates of more modern cores and Adreno 650 graphics. In any case, this hardware has 8 cores in 1+3+4 configuration, 1 Cryo 485 core at 2.84 GHz, 3 Cryo 485 cores at 2.42 GHz, and 4 slightly slower Cryo 485 cores at 1.78 GHz. When it comes to memory, the S10 Lite comes in 6 or 8 GB of RAM version with 128 GB of storage. There is not much to say about this hardware, since it's made to digest whatever app and use you may have now or in few years to come. The 7nm production process also guarantees more efficient power consumption than the competition, and the Snapdragon 855 performs better than Samsung's Exynos 9820 chipset, which is good news for potential future owners of the S10 Lite phone. The camera system has undergone major changes over the S10 series. The main 12-megapixel lens with f1.5 was replaced by the 48-megapixel quad Bayer sensor with f2.0 that we've talked about numerous times. The focus is handled by phase detection, and the lens has an optical stabilization that Samsung calls Super Steady OIS. Behind it is Samsung's new technology that combines hardware and software stabilization to eliminate unwanted movements that can blur the image and video. The main camera is accompanied by 12-megapixel 123-degree wide-angle lens with an f2.2 aperture and fixed focus, as well as a 5-megapixel f2.4 macro lens. Notice there is no depth sensor or telephoto lens, but this is the light version of the S10 after all. The front camera, similar to the main one, has a quad Bayer sensor with 32 megapixels, which means you will get the best results shooting at 8 megapixels, while f2.2 lets the camera absorb decent amount of light even when conditions are far from ideal. Main camera sensor is the same one we reviewed so many times recently it became boring. The sensor allows for very good photos, only slightly weaker than those on the regular S10. The pictures are very sharp, rich in detail, and have excellent dynamic range. To simply put it, photos are very high quality. The ultra-wide lens has pleasantly surprised us with images not too different from those of the main sensor. Of course, the fixed focus, slightly larger aperture, and the nature of the lens do impose some limitations. Nonetheless, the images are still crisp and detailed, with surprisingly good dynamic range and faithful color rendering that leans a bit towards the warmer end of the spectrum. Lens correction is at the high level, as something we are already expecting from Samsung. In low light environment, the quad Bayer sensor makes the most impact. With the use of HDR, you get high quality, usable images, especially if you have steady hands, since it sometimes takes a little time for the sensor to focus. Due to the nature of the sensor and the HDR, the dynamic range is good, with nice colors and high details. The wide-angle lens, as expected, produced slightly softer images with less details, especially because of the smaller aperture that prevents the absorption of large amount of light, like on the main sensor. There is noise, especially on the corners of the frame and the darkest parts, while the colors are fair. The dynamic range is weaker than on the main sensor, especially when you have a strong light source and shaded elements in the frame. Macro lens makes decent images, but not much more than that. It requires a lot of light and bit of gymnastics to focus because it has a fixed focus of about 3 to 5 centimeters. However, when you do manage to get the proper distance between the object and the camera, you will be pleasantly surprised by the detailed image. Selfie camera performs well in the most important areas. The skin color is true and the fixed focus gives a decent bokeh effect. The images are definitely crisp with clear light and dark parts and correct color rendering. Even when there's not much light in the frame, you will get decent photos with a steady hand. The powerful S10 Lite chipset seamlessly manages 4K video on the main and wide-angle sensor with real-time switching capabilities. As we've seen before, the 48 megapixel quad Bayer sensor performs great in video recording. The quality is high and super steady OIS provides more fluid footage when you move during recording. Surprisingly, the video angle lens also gives very good daytime videos, without much crop and quality over the main sensor. Stabilization, of course, is not available at 60 FPS and 4K, so it's up to you to choose the mode that suits your shooting conditions more. There's also slow-mo video recording in 960 frames at 720p, allowing you to take very interesting recordings in specific conditions. Night shots show the real difference between the main and wide-angle sensor. Due to the difference in the nature of the sensor and the lower aperture, wide-angle shots are darker with less detail and significantly less sharpness. Software noise reduction is struggling to keep it low, but noise is still present in darker areas, especially when there is a lot of contact. In both cases, you get very correct, nice shots, and we also like the focus of the main sensor does not wander, even when you pan the frame faster. On the software side, the S10 Lite comes with a fresh Android 10 OS and One UI 2, which we've talked about before, so we won't repeat ourselves, and if you're interested, check one of our earlier Samsung videos for more details. We noticed that the fingerprint sensor could be positioned a bit higher for better ergonomics and that its precision still lags behind the physical sensors. All the connections you need are there, and except for IP certification, which is completely absent, there are many restrictions on this Lite version of the S10. The biggest mystery of this phone is why Samsung called it Lite. It is a full-blooded representative of the S10 series with slightly different cameras and some differences compared to its older brothers. The advancements in battery and charging are really significant, which gives the phone great flexibility in terms of autonomy as well as time required for charging. Also, with the rather large screen and HDR+ support, the S10 Lite catches up to S10 model, which should not be the case given the Lite suffix. Name aside, we will say that this is an excellent Samsung flagship class phone and a refreshment among premium phones whose battery life does not allow more than a day of use. It offers premium features and mid-tier housing similar to Samsung A series. Thank you once again for watching Bench House review of Samsung Galaxy S10 Lite. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, and if you enjoyed the video, also leave us a like and a comment below. My name is Marco, and I will see you next time.